Hi, and welcome to my 5 tips for better drawing. So my first tip is going to be to use good references. A big mistake I see a lot of beginners use is thinking that their art isn't good enough because they can't get something to look exactly the way they wanted, but they're not really using references. They're kind of just going off of whatever's in their head. Now it's good to, draw from imagination, but if you want something to look a little bit more realistic or you want something to be, more presentable, I would definitely use references. It's good when you're looking at references to try to find something that has a good cast shadow, something that has a good light source, and something that has kind of interesting values to it. This could mean that it has good composition, or that it has a really good lighting setup, or it has good colors. It's kind of all up to whatever it is you're trying to achieve at that time. Another tip is to use the proper tools. Now, the ones I'm using here aren't ones that you have to use, but they kind of help me to get very big fills of pencil and then also do very fine details. Now, personally, I use smooth paper so that it doesn't rub up against each other. This prevents things from smudging and then having, most of your hard work go to waste. Now, these particular ones are from Cottonwood Arts. Now, I'm not sponsored by them, but I do use them in all of my portraits. I've used the plain Canson sketch ones before, but the paper itself is too textured, and it ended up rubbing away a lot of what I was working on whenever I would be out and about, drawing. Now, rough textured paper is really good for something like watercolor when you're trying to hold a lot of liquid or ink, but when you're trying to do something along the lines of graphite or colored pencil or anything that can rub away with a lot of friction, it's best to find something sort of like vellum paper or even maybe the kind that I have here. I also like to use these kneaded erasers. I use a pen eraser, but the kneaded erasers allow me to erase a big fill of graphite and get a little bit more in detail if I decide to, kind of mold the front of it together. These pen erasers, however, are the Mono Technico, I believe. They're very good for picking out very bright details, sort of like the highlight of an eye or the highlight on the tip of a nose, something where you have to be very precise and very, very bright with it. I also use varying shades of lead. I'll go anywhere from HB all the way up to 4B. This kind of helps me get a bigger range of values. So if I need to start very light and I'm afraid of, messing up my drawing, I start with an HB pencil and get in all of the composition and everything that I need. And then I'll go into rendering or shading with my 2B and my 4B, depending on how dark the image has to be. Alright, so my third tip is how to avoid smudging. Now, like I said, with the harder paper, it's a little bit, harder to go about this, but if you have smooth paper like I do, it's still prone to smudge from time to time if you have any sweat or oil on your hand at all. That's why I use these drawing gloves. It doesn't really matter what brand you use. I just had an old tablet lying around and I decided to keep this one. And then I lost my XP pen one, so we're stuck with this one for today. But it helps to prevent any oils or any sweat or lotion, if you have it on your hand, from getting onto your graphite and dragging it across the page. Now, it's good if you're intentionally trying to blend something to get a softer edge, but this prevents you from doing it accidentally while you're trying to focus on your drawing. Now, my fourth tip is one of the most important. It's to start very light and very loose when you first start any drawing. This helps you to kind of pick out what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of later on as you're rendering the drawing. It also helps you get the structure of a head or the structure of a building, whatever it is you're trying to draw, a lot easier than having to do it with a dark pencil and just keep erasing it back and forth. It's good to kind of start out this way just so that you can kind of see what you're trying to do before you commit to it. Now, my fifth tip here is what I do when I start any drawing after I'm done blocking in the head. I try to find the darkest areas and the cast shadows. Adding cast shadows to your work kind of helps it pop out from the background. It also gives it a little bit more realism because your objects are kind of casting a shadow on another object, meaning that it kind of lives in the space and it has its own form. Also, starting in the darkest areas allows you to go over it multiple times without having to worry about erasing it later. If you start in a lighter area and you start with a very dark line, it's a little bit harder to erase it later on. So if you need a completely white space, you've kind of destroyed your own drawing in a way. Now this portrait isn't completely done yet. There's still a few more things I'd like to add to it. If you would like to see it finished, go ahead in my description and I have a link taking you to my Skillshare classes. I just uploaded a new one, the top 10 tips for better drawing or something along those lines. And it'll go over 5 more tips that we didn't talk about here, how to do better backgrounds, and then also the proper way to hold the pencil, just everything. It's a little bit more in depth. And thankfully, if it's your first time on Skillshare, it's completely free. My link will give you 2 free weeks of Skillshare Premium, and you'll be able to watch my class as well as some very, very well-known artists like Chris Hong and Gabrielle Bigelow. So I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you would like to get any of the materials that I've covered in this course, I'll have links to those down in my description as well. Now, I'm not sponsored by any of these brands, but I do make a small commission off of it if you go through my Amazon link, and I'd greatly appreciate it. Every cent goes towards making the show a little bit better. Alright, I hope these tips were helpful, and I'd love to see what you've done with them. Go ahead and tag me in Instagram or Twitter @PaperCuervo, and have a fun time drawing.